Hello, everyone. This is Thomas Pepin, NHL Talk. I'm Thomas Pepin, and let's talk about the NHL. So, in today's stream, the subject I decided on would be to talk about getting rid of fighting in the NHL because there's been discussion about if fighting should get eliminated, and basically I'm going to give my opinion on that. So, I guess first I should say everything's always done for these streams. They're always done on the spot, so no prep work except for the subject. So I don't know going into any of these pretty much what my final conclusion is going to be. So, like, if it's a study, I'll be doing the research on the spot. If it's something like this, um, like, I might have an idea of what um, my final opinion's going to be on the subject, but I don't actually know because I have to look at, a couple things. So, um, yeah, so that aside, what I wanted to preface everything with is just kind of my background because, of course, I'm going to have certain biases on the subject. Um, so first, I should say I started watching hockey and was raised on hockey during the 90s, basically. And so, if you're familiar with hockey in the 90s, there was tons of fighting. I mean, I think it's always, up until recently, been the case where fighting has been at approximately the same level. That's actually something I don't know. Maybe it's something we'll be able to take a look at in this stream. I don't know if I'll have the data or time to gather the data because I want to wrap this up in an hour. So, um, in any case, I know at the very least the 90s was heavy on fighting, and so there's like Probert, Domi, well, in their fights together. Who else was there? I mean, towards the 2000s, there was like Laroc. Um, God, there's a few names that I'm just gapping on right now. But like enforcers were very prevalent in the NHL. Every team would at least have one, um, more or less, or people that would be like multi-purpose. So like, well, I mean, this would be later on, but as an example, like a Lucic, a guy that doesn't fight so often and can produce at a reasonable rate. Um, so, oh, and I just saw Caleb Shea. Thanks for tuning in. Um, so yeah, I mean, enforcers have were extremely prevalent in my youth, and so for me, I guess you would everybody always kind of likes things the way they were, and so I would be biased in that sense. The other thing is I started, um, well, doing martial arts when I was like, I think I was like 5. I might have been even 4. I can't remember for sure. Um, and was watching like even the UFC back when it originally started. I was into it back then. My dad was into mixed martial arts. He was a training partner for a guy who actually competed back in the day. Um, and so I trained in it like my whole, especially my youth and teenage years. And then towards my adulthood, I just did my own thing. I never really trained at a specific gym like a jujitsu gym or whatever. Um, but anyways, so I'm also biased in the sense that I have a background in martial arts and like martial arts. So that'll kind of skew my judgment on things. And then the last thing I was thinking about before the stream of bias was I'm also just I'm a weird individual. I like things to be different, sometimes just for the sake of being different. And so I guess I might as well just talk about it right away. So, for example, there's no leagues with fighting as a normal thing that's included and accepted in the sport. So I think it's kind of cool to have fighting allowed in hockey, and I don't think that's uh, influenced by the other things that I mentioned. So, having seen so much fighting in the NHL before, and then my background, just exposure to martial arts. I don't think it's from that. I think it's just I do genuinely like the fact that it's different. And when you see casual fans, what's oftentimes something that, or people that uh, first get exposed to the sport or first start watching the sport, something that's most interesting to them is the fact that you can just drop your gloves and fight in the middle of a hockey game. Um, so I think it's pretty cool. It's a unique thing to draw people to the sport. Is fighting good? Like, is it good to punch people in the face? Obviously not. Like, I mean, it's clear as day. But I mean, so long as both people are willing, and then if they're not, that the people that started the fight with an unwilling participant, so long as they're punished for it, I don't see what the issue is. So, what is it like in? I think I just heard this. I don't know 100% if it's factual, but like apparently in Texas, I think it's called mutual combatant, something like that. So basically, I don't know 100%, so don't hold me to this, but I'm sure this is the case somewhere. Where if both participants agree to have a fight, then it's allowed. It's not assault. So if that can happen in real life, why not in sport? I mean, I know sport is about competition, but and fighting isn't like you're not. The goal of a hockey game is not to fight in order to win. It's to score more goals than the other team. But I mean, there's other parts of different sports that are complementary that don't directly impact the score, but have an impact on the circumstances that of the game and stuff. So anyway, so just that's kind of my thoughts generally because I'm a bit of a weirdo and I think it's kind of cool to have something different just about the sport. And as a hockey fan, I'm in a sense almost, I wouldn't say proud, but like I'm just happy that there's something different about hockey, and in this case, just related to fighting being in the sport. So, anyway, so those are kind of my biases and um, yeah, those will influence obviously what I'll have to say here. So, otherwise, so a couple things. Just give me a second. I want to pull up. So in the description, I said what I would talk about. So, number of fights per season is something I'm going to try to take a look at. I don't know how easy it is to find. I'm pretty sure it was easy from NHL.com, but we'll have to double check. And then something I thought about just before the stream is I might pull up other people's arguments just about fighting being allowed or disallowed in the NHL. So that's something I'll have a look at, maybe. And then I've already talked about kind of the fact that fighting is part of the culture of hockey, or it has been at least. Should it be moving forward? I don't know necessarily what my opinion is, but that's something we'll consider. So, on that note, let's see what we can find in terms of stats. So, I'm just pulling it up and then I'll share screen. So again, since this is done on the spot, I actually don't know what the trends are, and I'm interested to see. Um, I hope team stats we can find it because that would be easiest to see. Do, 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 do. Miscellaneous. Missed shots. Empty net goals. Shot blocks. Hits. Shot shootout. Scoring. Penalty kill. Oh, did I see penalties? Yeah. I think you can have 5 minute majors for other penalties. I mean, it's kind of bad the fact that I don't know all right away. Um, just which, like all these, it's like something I learned about with uh, entry level slides for contracts and stuff, just how it's kind of age based as opposed to um, like what league they came from and where they're playing outside of the NHL. And so, anyways, there's still things having been around hockey so much and playing NHL, the video game, my whole life, just stuff that it's either it's not relevant on an everyday basis, or just you don't ever see it because it's just not that critical. Um, so this is for this season. We don't really care about that. We want previous seasons. So let's go back to we are past 50 years, maybe, I think is fair. So then what's 50 years prior to now? So we are in 23. So 73, I guess. I don't want to go back further, do I? I guess it would be that. Don't win a some results. Let's see. So this is in order of major penalties per team. Now, what it's not going to show, so like I don't think it's necessarily all that useful or relevant to get each year's totals and stuff like that. Like it's really not that worth it. So you can get a general idea, and already you can see a trend here when it comes to penalties. So major penalties, you can see clearly the most penalized teams are all mid to late 80s. So it's just prior to kind of when I was most closely watching the league. So as a kid, I watched hockey and thought about hockey. No, maybe not even as much as now. But anyways, yeah. So you can see clearly 85, 87, 86, 88, 89. There's a couple little ones mixed in, like 2001, 91. So a few 90s. But basically, everything is mid to late 80s with a sprinkling of 90s. Um, and then, is it gonna? Oh, it doesn't let us go direct to the end. Oh, I can do it this way. Let's just go to 12. So, like, if you look here, full seasons, and they have 12 fighting, like, or well, likely 12 fighting majors. So, like, pretty much fighting is already almost gone. 13, 14, 15, and it's all most recent seasons. 2015, 2020. So clearly fighting, like, I don't know the exact amount um, for each season. It's something I'll search for it and see, but just you can already see basically fighting's gone down. Well, so let's just consider 12 versus 100. So a tenth of the number of fights. So, I mean, fighting is pretty much gone as it is. Um, is that from rule changes? I know partially, yes. Like, there's the instigating rules. Um, what is it? Last 5 or 10 minutes of the game, something like that. If you start a fight, then you get, is it suspended, or I don't know. Again, these rules, like, maybe I should know them, but I don't know if it's all that important to know. So just the gist is there's been rules that have decreased or would influence uh, less NHL fights. So I mean, there's those factors, but otherwise, just the league is getting away from fighting. I'd say a big reason why is, so, like, back in the day when you'd have an enforcer, the reason you'd have the enforcer is because people would go after, or at least in concept or in theory, you would have them to protect your star players. So, like, McSorley with Gretzky is a great example. So if anybody went after Gretzky, McSorley would fight them, and then there, it would prevent people from going after Gretzky. Whereas now people could theoretically go after stars to try to injure them, and the repercussions, there could be a guy or two that could maybe fight, but they aren't now specifically made for fighting. There might be guys that are, again, multi-purpose, like a Foligno or something like that. Is it Marcus Foligno? I think. But anyways, so, or like Matt Martin or something like that. So these guys, they can still produce. They can fulfill their responsibilities well, like produce goals or being involved in goals, like for assists or like just setting up plays or going in front of the net or whatever. So it's not that these people don't exist anymore. It's just that they have to be useful, and that's the big trend. I would argue the biggest reason why fighting has gone away is because it's a results driven game. Every sport would be, where you want to win, and you can't just put out a team of enforcers and expect to win, because at some point you're going to have if you went, let's say your entire team was enforcers versus an entire team of skilled players, the skilled players are going to dance around those enforcers. They just won't be able to keep up, and you're going to get dominated. And these places um, these teams, they want to win games, make money, have fans, uh, all that kind of stuff. So it's obvious it wouldn't make sense to have a team of enforcers because you're never going to win. Um, so I think that's probably the biggest driver of why fighting has decreased. But just because it's decreased and just because it's not uh, the goal of the sport, so you don't get a goal from winning a fight. Um, so there's no real need to have fighting, but it's like I said, there's things like the uniqueness draws eyes to the sport of new fans, um, things like that. And so another thing, so something that I took a look at briefly, I think it was yesterday, um, just about with suspensions in the NFL. So, and a very similar sport when it comes to physical contact would be the NFL. And there's been like basically no suspensions or a negligible number of suspensions. Not for fighting, but for like things like intent to injure and stuff like that. And from what I read, it's basically a 15-yard penalty. So in college football, um, for targeting, so where basically the rule is a defenseless player, you target their, I don't know if it's necessarily targeting their head, but more or less it's where you intend to injure them when they're defenseless. And what is it? You get suspended for like half a game, and I don't know if there's more rules beyond that, but more or less that's what you see. So, um, so really, in like similar contact sports, there's nothing. Um, there's nothing really being used to deter injuring players because I haven't seen, like, I don't watch those sports as closely as hockey. I don't know how frequently players try to injure other players, um, and if there should be suspensions and things like that. But we know with like traumatic brain injuries and stuff like that, with the NFL is one of the biggest ones that they're trying to avoid it. Um, I don't know why they wouldn't have suspensions in the NFL for essentially intent to injure or dangerous contact and things like that. But we already have it in the NHL. So um, basically, all I'm getting at in talking about this stuff is there's deterrence for intent to injure in the NHL, where previously it was basically enforcers. Well, I mean, from the title of their role, enforcer, you're enforcing the stability of the game, the safety of players, uh, as a player, as opposed to as um, a ref or something like that. Um, so not only did we have and do we theoretically have enforcers, there's also the deterrent of suspensions. So really, of all things to protect players in the NHL, we've like there's a lot of layers. The thing is since we have the suspensions, do you actually need the enforcers in the game as well? Um, in theory, no. In practice, I don't know. Maybe it deters people, the threat of getting your face punched in. Um, I don't know, but anyways, so that's part of the argument of keeping it. But with it having decreased so much, is it even a factor given that suspensions are already um, commonplace in the NHL for intent to injure? I don't know. Um, so let's see if we can actually see the answer of if like what the number of fights are per season. Is there anyone reliable? So based on this title here, it seems like fighting actually was low, went up, and then went back down. This actually might be good. Oh, and on the subject, since you can see the title here, how the QMJHL banned fighting. So it's already started. Just should it actually take place is kind of the question. Come on, I just want a graph. Well, this shows exactly what I just showed. Hmm. That doesn't show it. From 2000 to 20. I don't know if that's really gonna. I guess this kind of shows not as far back as I would like, but it's kind of good enough. Demonstrates basically what I'm saying. So fights per game in 2000-2001 was 0.55. The peak in this range is 0.64. And then basically it's dropped all the way to what were the COVID years? 1920. So yeah, so basically down to 0.18 fights per game. So whatever that is, 0.18 divided by, let's just say 0.64. So it's nearly a quarter of the number of fights. And based on what we looked at from the NHL stats, in the mid to late 80s, yeah, well, what I said, so it's approximately a tenth, it looks like. So if I actually did all the addition of every season, it probably would turn out being approximately a tenth. Since we see here it's about a quarter. Um, so yeah, fighting now versus where it was is basically a tenth, and so fighting's nearly gone anyways. Actually, I should go back, and one thing I want to see is because it said 0.18 fights per game. So that means 1 in every 5 games, approximately, there'd be a fight. Which is pretty low. So that means on any given night, if there's 5 games, one of those would probably have one fight. Like, that's nothing. So fighting's, like, I mean, pretty non-existent. And even at the, like, let's say uh, zero point 0.5 fights per game, so on any given night, if there's 6 teams playing, 3 of those would have one fight. And it just, so I mean, it just doesn't seem like much. Whereas how much would it be if it's a tenth? Then there would be 1.8 fights per game. So then there'd be 1 to 2 fights in every single game. Back in the 80s, approximately. Like, I don't know if this is actually accurate. I'd have to do the full math, but it's basically close enough, for argument's sake. So 1 to 2 fights per game. No wonder why. It was like, it's something that you thought about so much back when I was a kid. Just the number of fights in hockey. That's crazy. Um, Give me 1 second. Just want to check something here. Um, do, 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 do. Yeah, so basically what I just wanted to see was my notes here, if there's anything else that I needed to um, talk about or address. And really, the only other thing is, I guess, what are the arguments for keeping fighting in hockey? Like, we obviously know that the reasons against it. So, like, it doesn't impact the score directly. It's that you don't get goals for fighting. Um, what does, yeah, why fighting, generally speaking, is not good. Like, it's not a good thing to punch somebody else in the face. It's dangerous. Falling to the ice. That's why they had that rule about taking off helmets when you're gonna fight, because people would, from my understanding at the very least, I wasn't a pro fighter or anything like that. So, but my understanding was that they would take off helmets so that they don't scratch up their knuckles from hitting the helmet when they're fighting, especially when cages came in, because those you can cut up your hands because it's directly in your target. So yeah, so they got rid of that. That's another thing that prevents fighting, I guess. Forces people to punch it into helmets, which I think is kind of dumb. But it prevents people from falling and landing on their head and having serious injuries. Holding players accountable. Actually, this seems like it might do a good job. Pro. Allowing fighting makes the sport safer by holding players accountable. I would argue against that. I think the suspensions are probably sufficient so long as uh, they're used, and it's not suspensions directly related to fighting. It's attempt to injure. So, as a contact sport like football, um, you need to do things to prevent people from injuring other people. Football, I don't know why they don't have suspensions or serious things to prevent people from trying to injure each other. Um, I mean, I don't know the sport so well that I can say that is true 100%, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And then in the NHL, there's like suspensions, and they're used frequently for different things like hits to the head, and so there's enough deterrence of penalties and suspensions where whole making this the sport safer by holding players accountable, I don't think is a good argument, because I think the league does a good enough job. Um, did they in the past? I don't know necessarily. I don't think so. I would have to go take a look at the number of suspensions, what they were for. I mean, it would be too complicated to address in an hour stream, but so I don't think that argument is good. Drawing fans and increases the entertainment 100%. I think that's a valid reason for keeping fighting. Um, you could say, like, it's essentially the same argument, it's different, but more or less the same argument as what I was saying about just having something unique about the sport. I like the fact that there's something unique like fighting in hockey, um, just for the sake of uniqueness. It's not even necessarily about bringing in fans, but it's like this weird thing tied to the sport. It makes me, um, in a sense, proud to be a player of the sport, a fan of the sport. Like, it's pretty it's pretty badass to have where you can just drop the gloves and fight with a guy. That's pretty cool in my opinion. Is that toxic masculinity, as they say nowadays? Yeah, maybe. Is fighting a good thing? Absolutely not. uh, is it okay for people to agree to fight? Yes. If two people are willing to do something, who is anybody to say what they should and shouldn't be allowed to do? Um, so long as it's not negatively impacting everybody else. Now, you could argue that by seeing fighting, kids would be more likely to fight. And I think they've made that argument for like video games and all sorts of stuff. And I don't think it's actually been proven. Again, it's kind of outside of the scope of this stream, but uh, I'm pretty confident that exposure to subject matter doesn't necessarily produce actions. So we see it with, like, for example, the legalization of marijuana. I don't know necessarily that this is true, but related crime, I'm pretty certain, has gone down. Um, use probably has or will go up and then go back down. Um, Decriminalization of drugs, just generally speaking, from my understanding, again, has produced less usage, or at the very least, less dangerous usage and less related crime. Again, I don't know necessarily 100% about all this stuff, but that's my understanding. I've had enough exposure that I'm pretty confident that that's correct, or at least generally close enough to being correct in that direction. Um, so is I don't think any arguments about seeing fighting, um, producing other people to like influencing kids to fight. I don't think that that's a good argument or a good enough reason to get rid of fighting. Um, Again, it's adults consenting to fighting. Um, it's entertaining. Otherwise, we should ban all contact sports. No NFL in any format uh, of any contact at the very least. So football should not have even touching because you could poke someone in the eye. Like, I mean, when you go to different extremes of things, um, it kind of proves a point. Um, like what I guess equally, you could make the same argument that if you allow people to agree to bring guns onto the ice and shoot at each other, that would be allowed. But I'm pretty sure most people would not want to um, bring guns onto the ice and shoot each other. So I don't know if that's really a good argument, anyways. But so long story short, all I'm getting at is consensual adults choosing to fight. It increases entertainment for fans, draws in new fans. I think that argument is very valid, and it's just unique. Like, it's unique. Why not have something unique? It's interesting. I don't like. Yes, I know that influences people to like watch the sport, but I even just think do it for the sake of just being unique. Um, Fighting is a hockey tradition that exists in the unofficial rules as an unwritten code among players. Again, cultural thing. I don't think that's a good argument for or against, because just because something was a certain way before doesn't mean it should always be that way. Cons, concussions. If that's the argument, then you should get rid of, again, like I said, all contact sports, NFL, boxing, jiu-jitsu. You can hurt somebody, not necessarily concussions, but like you can pop someone's knee out, permanently injure them. Like, I mean, anything. You should prevent sprinting because somebody could tear their hamstring. Like, I mean, if that's the argument, preventing injury, everybody lives in a bubble. It's a horrible argument. I disagree completely. So should they have done things like where they can't take off their helmets? That's a tough one because you can hurt your knuckles and stuff. And those injuries are kind of pretty, it can keep you out of games and stuff. Versus, I would say it's a small risk of hitting your head off the ice. No, I don't know. I think maybe the risk of hitting your head off the ice is worse than the frequency of scratching up your knuckles and then missing games. So I think that rule about keeping on helmets is probably right. If there was a way to look at data of like games lost due to knuckle injuries versus head injuries, and then as well as severity. I think it's a fair thing to make helmets mandatory in fighting. Now, the argument though, one thing I actually would argue about is I don't know, and this is actually a subject I was going to investigate at some point, is I don't know if visors should be mandatory in the NHL, and in particular when it comes to keeping fighting in the sport. Because the helmet's fine. Like, I understand why you would force people to keep on helmets. But to force cages, if you're keeping fighting in, is actually to increase the chance of injury in fighting, and the injuries from messed up knuckles from fighting with visors versus facial injuries, that's where I would argue that the um, severity of the injury versus the protection, I don't know if it's necessarily there. Now, they would have probably done research before making that a rule, but sometimes they do it just for optics or uh, philosophy or whatever, not necessarily because it's been proven to be like a good way of preventing injury. So, anyways, um, so that's one argument I would say is maybe it would be smart to keep visors out or allow people who are going to fight more frequently not to wear um, visors, which they still technically allow, but it's a grandfather clause thing from when you started. But, anyways, so just a thought. Um, Fighting in hockey leads to concussions, yes. Mental health problems, I would argue. Well, I guess also anxiety relating to having to fight, but people don't often have to fight. If that's how you get into the league, I mean, it's kind of the path you choose. Uh, Most players, like Sidney Crosby, doesn't go out there being anxious about having to fight. So I don't know if mental health problems is necessarily a valid argument against fighting. Um, it would be head trauma producing mental health issues. That I agree, but not just mental health problems in general because you don't have to fight. You'll only fight as a result of you doing something stupid. So, or it being your role. So I don't know if I like that argument. Death from fighting, I don't know if it might have happened. But then again, why if we're gonna get rid of it in hockey, why don't we get rid of it and get rid of boxing in general? The purpose of boxing is to knock a person out, whereas in hockey, it's just kind of a side thing. Now, because it's a side thing, does it need to be in there? Not necessarily, but because it's a side thing, it's just so rare that what's the big deal about leaving it there? Fighting at the professional level it sets a bad example for kids. That's something that I brought up without even looking at it. But everything. So parents drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, uh, bad parenting in general. So having anger issues in the supermarket. Like, I mean, everything can set a bad example for kids. So, movies. Then we're going to ban all the Marvel movies because there's violence. Like, just give it a break. So I disagree completely with that argument. Hockey glorifies violence. That's, like I said, the toxic masculinity thing. But I mean, people agree to do something. Uh, Everything glorifies violence. Yeah, Braveheart, the movie, glorifies violence. War exists, and it's not pretty much never going anywhere. As much as we want to prevent all violence, it's just never going to happen. So glorifying violence, well, almost like so much of our entertainment includes violence. So, what, we're going to ban all entertainment with any violence? Um, what about, so for example, what about movies that go and demonstrate how spousal abuse is bad? We're going to ban those because of the abuse that's in the movie. How does that make any sense? You can't actually demonstrate how it's bad. Equally, war movies. Is violence bad? Yes, you need to see that violence is bad in order to know how bad it actually is. It's why people have so many mental health issues from serving in the military and stuff, like you see how bad it is, and that has a huge lasting impact on you. If you never get exposed to anything um, that's violent, the minute you get exposed to it, and everybody's going to get exposed to something scary and violent in the span of their lives, if you have no exposure, the the amount of impact that's going to have on you is going to be dramatic. It's been proven in psychology, exposure therapy is a good thing. Now, do you want to constantly see violence? It's like we saw, what's the name of that movie? Um, oh God, I can't remember the name of the movie. Or is it Clockwork Orange? I don't know if I'm getting the name right, but you would know the movie from me mentioning the. It's some word similar to that if it's not that. So where the guy gets his eyes pried open, constantly sees violence, and he gets disgusted by um, violence. I forget what I was getting at with that point though, because I got too lost in trying to remember what the point was. Um, so actually, too much exposure. Is that what I was getting at? I guess so much exposure it disgusts you. Um, and then in the sense of like, so for example, in exposure therapy with psychology, what people would do is if you're um, scared of water, you would first look at a picture of an ocean, and if that's okay, then you would go out to a place where there's a body of water and look at it, and then you would maybe get closer to it, and then you would maybe dip your toe in it, and so on and so on. And so exposure to things is actually beneficial so long as you're not thrown into it. Which is why, coming back to what I was saying, military is just so brutal. You go from, yes, you train with weapons and stuff in your military training, but to go from not seeing somebody blown up to seeing somebody blown up, it's like it's a crazy shock to your system, and that creates major trauma. So anyways, I'm not saying that people should be exposed to people getting blown up all the time and then that'll help them be better military, like be able to handle things in the military. I'm not saying war is good. I'm not saying violence is good. I'm not saying anything like that. All I'm saying is exposure doesn't necessarily produce people wanting to do things. If anything, it maybe could even deter them or make them more comfortable, which in the case of drugs probably makes people less likely to do it. So, anyways, so I don't like that argument either. So, that's at least that one article. Maybe we'll have a look at one more. Um, Bleacher Report's not bad to take a look at. And then we'll also just look at if there's any other. This one's both of these are very aggressive titles, so let's hope that they have at least some other arguments than what we said. 7 reasons fan appeal impacts the game. Kind of. Policing, I think the league does good enough now versus previously. Builds teams. Fighting is better than maiming. What exactly do you mean? Yeah, being able to. That's exactly what I was saying about mutual combat. If you if you prevent people from being able to sort out what has happened, so like let's say somebody did something cheap, um, yeah, so it says it there. Let's say somebody does a cheap shot, would you rather somebody else go back and do another cheap shot, or would you rather them the guys drop their gloves, sort it out, and then typically it's what happens in the schoolyard with kids. Like if you let kids sort it out, often you even have sometimes the kids turn out being friends. I've seen it after having fought. Um, if you don't let them sort it out, you're gonna leave people to bully, and then it never gets resolved, and then more dangerous things are gonna happen. Like I would argue, school shootings and things like that. So you need again also you don't want to let things get out of hand where one person's beating up another person all the time. Like there's a balance of everything, but the ability I think it's better to teach people to defend themselves than it is to try to prevent any fighting from taking place, because then those bullies are still going to bully behind closed doors, and um, that kid that's being bullied is never going to learn to defend themselves, and then they're going to lash out with something dramatically worse. So fighting is better than maiming. It's kind of a good way to put it, and I kind of agree. Tradition, I don't think that's a good argument. Bill's rivalry, that's part of the so drawing in fans just from the fighting is a decent argument. Rivalries, well, you saw what happened with like in the what was it 90s or no, it was early thousands. Anyways, with like Patrick Waugh, the bench brawl where Lemieux hits somebody from behind, I can't remember who, and then there was the bench brawl, and it was like I think it was Patrick Waugh against it was either Vernon or Osgood, or he fought both of them at one point, like different times. Um, Man, does that ever make it exciting? Like it was so exciting to watch hockey when all that stuff was going on. So it's another way of bringing up the entertainment value. I really do like that as an argument. Again, considering all my perspectives on things, and the counter arguments, you whatever. If you want to put everybody in a bubble, then there's no point in having hockey anymore. So it's just the extremes. How much do you want to allow versus how much you want to disallow? So I like this as an argument. Building rivalries is pretty good. Um, it adds to the entertainment value, um, and like the die-hardness of fans. So, anyways, a couple decent arguments there for it that I didn't necessarily think of right away. This thing you have to pay, so screw you guys. Do. This doesn't say anything. Brain damage, yeah, I already said about that. So I mean, obviously it's bad. That's You're not saying anything. It's too short of an article. And it sucks when they don't have any headings, because then you can't see the main arguments, or like a go to the summary fighting. Yeah. Cool. I mean, not all people who have done combat sports have traumatic brain injuries. We've seen that. Some people are perfectly healthy as they age. Other people have hard times, and oftentimes it's the people who've been hit the most and hit the worst. Fighting is so rare in the NHL, especially now, that do you really. And so there was no banning of fighting, it just naturally went away because it just wasn't good for teams' performance. So, do you really need to do more than that? Like it's like it's like the free market. The free market decides what's going to work, what people are willing to pay. Yes, you need some things to prevent the extremes. So, for example, there's ways like they prevent price fixing and things like that. Um, they're monopolies and all that kind of stuff. So you need to have some things, which is, for example, the suspensions. So if people, if somebody goes and picks a fight with somebody and beats them up and they didn't have any defense for it, should they be suspended? Quite possibly, yes. Does it happen often now? I don't know. I don't think probably often or correctly enough of what they maybe should do, but um, so I could see that argument. Yeah, if somebody's defenseless, but then again, I mean, I'm biased when I say this, but for example, if somebody does a cheap shot and then they refuse to fight, should you let the guy get beaten up? Uh, well, you should have penalized that cheap shot. Sometimes you miss it, though, is the problem. And then people police it themselves. But then maybe you should have just waited for the league to do a suspension. But does the league do suspensions well enough to prevent those cheap shots from happening? That's another question. I think now they're doing pretty good. So for things like slew footing or kneeing, they've been giving suspensions and stuff pretty well, even when it's missed in the game, or the refs get the penalty or give too little of a penalty versus the player had done. So I don't know. Basically, I altogether, I think that I can probably start to conclude this. So altogether, I think I don't think that there's any need necessarily for fighting in the NHL. So does it need to be part of the sport? No. I think that I would say that argument is good enough, and I agree with it. But has it existed for so long? Yes. Because it's existed, does it necessarily need to continue to exist? No. Since it's already there, like, so long as it's not so dramatically bad, do you need to get rid of it? Probably not. That's probably my opinion on it, is it's not because it's existed that it should continue to exist. It's that we've already opened the box. It's already there. If people don't want to fight, they just don't have to. So, do you need to ban it? No. People will choose to fight if they want to, and they won't fight if they don't want to. And the only real weird ground is where somebody does something bad and the consequence is somebody fighting them. If that's the case, just turtle. and then you don't have to fight and you won't get hurt that bad. If somebody cheap shots you, then they'll probably get suspended. Like, so for example, let's say you do a cheap shot, somebody chases you down and then punches you in the back of the head. You'll just get suspended for doing that. So as far as I'm concerned, that's good enough. So do you really need to ban fighting? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any big need to ban it. It's already been going away. If it's of no value ever, it'll just stop. And it's gotten pretty darn close. Like, teams will have, well, we saw it, 12 fights per season, which means, what is that, 1/6 or something like that of games they'll have a fight. One of every 6 they'll have a fight, one fight, versus before where it would be like almost 2 fights per game. So I mean, it's already nearly gone. there isn't a benefit of having an enforcer on your team. So the market's doing its job. It's getting rid of fighting. If it's going to completely go away, it'll go away on its own. And I think that if that happens, that's fine. It's just how it's meant to be. I don't think it needs to be forced along the way. The fact that you can fight, you can agree to fight with somebody, I think is a deterrent for people to do cheap shots. That you're going to be, somebody will probably come up to you after you've done a cheap shot and will say, hey, look, you gotta defend your previous action by fighting me now. and is that toxic masculinity? Well, whatever. Like I said, put everybody in a bubble and nobody can say or do any mean thing ever in the rest of their lives, or they're put in prison chained to a wall or something like that. But that's violent as it is. So if that's an argument, I don't think it's a good one. So if it's going to disappear, let the market decide. If people don't want to watch it, they won't watch hockey. If players don't want to do it, they won't do it. We've already seen what's happened. It's not good for management. They don't want those players on the teams because they're not going to produce the points that are going to, or the goals to get the team to win championships and make money. So I mean, it's already getting being pushed out of the league anyways, so you don't need any extra push as far as I'm concerned. So anyways, so that's kind of my opinion on getting rid of fighting. The answer is doesn't need to be. It'll sort itself out as far as I'm concerned. And for the reasons I said that we should keep it, like entertainment, I like that argument about rivalries, which adds more entertainment, accountability, the fact that it's largely consensual, uniqueness, and then the counter arguments I just don't think are good enough. If somebody doesn't want to fight, then they typically won't have to, and then concussions and all that stuff. People choose to get into boxing, so people can choose to fight in the NHL if they want to. Let people choose. Stop being the police preventing people from having choices in life. That's my opinion. So anyways, so we'll leave it there. I hope that was interesting enough. And if you like the stream, hit the like button, share with your friends, subscribe, turn on notifications. The channel homepage has upcoming streams on regular NHL content. Next stream is this evening, midnight Eastern, where I do a recap of this past week. There's not too many news stories. I'm going to have a look at a couple other things during the stream. And on that note, I actually forgot to go over statistical leaders last stream, so I'll try to remember to do that. I have a list now of the topics, so I'll just follow that list for the next stream to hopefully not miss anything. But yeah, so that's coming up tonight. Otherwise, every Friday there's 2 streams, one in the morning, or afternoon, one in the late evening, and then that's on the channel homepage. For things I can't schedule ahead of time, like franchise mode, that schedules in the About section of the channel. It runs Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. For things, or for Be a Pro, that's whenever I have time or feel like it, which I had a couple times where I could play. I hope I can get some more time. I've been busy lately. Well, I'm always busy, but anyways. Any comments, leave them in the comments, suggestions likewise, and we will see you guys later. Midnight Eastern, again, for a recap of the past week. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys then. Okay, bye.